The droid's photoreceptors flickered in the stale air of Iona's 7th station. Orion West, lead engineer of the remote outpost, tightened the final bolt on its arm joint, his steady hands guided by years of methodical craftsmanship. He glanced up from the mechanical figure to study the cramped enclosure of his workshop. Corrugated metal panels, stacked shipping crates, and the hum of outdated life support systems all merged into a setting that felt more like a forsaken salvage yard than a vital station corridor. He exhaled softly. Perhaps the sight of dilapidated steel walls and the tang of machine oil was not the dream he once envisioned, but it was home, and any place that kept him busy and challenged his abilities was a place he embraced, for now. He ran a hand over his short-cropped hair, straightened his jacket, and wondered if the day might bring anything but routine repair calls. Standing, he returned the newly serviced droid to its station port, intending to file a standard diagnostic report and resume a quiet evening. Still, his thoughts drifted to the swirling emptiness of the cosmos just beyond the station's hull. Iona 7, situated on the edge of the Ionian frontier, had once been a prized commercial hub. Over the last few decades, though, trade routes had shifted, leaving the station as a mere way station for wandering travelers, refugees seeking new lives, and the occasional starship in dire need of repairs. Its slow decline rarely yielded excitement. But as though on cue, alarms began to buzz through the corridor. Orion jerked upright, stepping to a control panel. Red lights flared across the station schematic, indicating an incoming vessel requesting immediate docking rights. He frowned and punched in override codes, ensuring that Iona 7's battered systems would not collapse under the sudden load. The name of the craft flickered onto the screen, Radiance of Dawn, flagged with royal credentials that, in practice, should be recognized across half the known galaxy. For a moment, he felt his heart pound. Some aristocrat or official possessed the authority to overshadow standard docking protocols, though royalty rarely, if ever, chose to visit such a neglected place. Moments later, the station comm crackled to life with an imperious voice demanding to speak with the chief engineer. Orion, wiping perspiration from his brow, keyed in his response. "This is Orion West, lead engineer of Iona 7, he announced, trying to maintain a calm, polite tone. "We have your vessel on limited approach. You'll need to clarify." A curt reply cut him off. "We have no time for clarifications. The Radiance of Dawn requires immediate service." Docking now. The line went dead. Orion felt his mouth twitch in annoyance, but set aside his frustration. Whoever they were, they had urgency on their side, and Iona 7 had precious few visitors. He found himself hustling down the main corridor, patching in what little backup power existed in the docking ring. If the Radiance of Dawn demanded immediate service, so be it. He only hoped the damage was not beyond the station's capacity to fix. The bay doors parted, squeaking in protest. Smoke poured out of the newly arrived craft's main thrusters, leaving a hazy curtain of dim light. Through it stepped a tall woman clad in an elegant, star-silver cloak. She stood with perfect posture, shining hair pinned up by a filigree circlet, and eyes so sharp Orion could feel them fixing on him as soon as he approached. Behind her trailed two servants, each weighed down by luggage and equipment. The woman scanned the surroundings with an expression hovering between disdain and worry, then focused on Orion, as though reading his measure at a glance. "You there," she said, stepping forward. "Engineer Orion West, I presume. I am Duchess Reina of the Starborn House of Lysandris, and I require your expertise, now." Orion suppressed a grin. This was no typical aristocrat. She was, in fact, higher in rank than most, a Starborn Duchess. He could see from the tension around her eyes that, for all her outward regal composure, something had rattled her profoundly. "Yes, I'm Orion West," he confirmed, turning off the main alarm. "You mentioned immediate service? Iona 7 has limited resources, but we'll do our best." Her chin lifted in the slightest. "My starship's primary systems have been failing since we left the core worlds. The quantum drive overheated, auxiliary thrusters shut down, and half our instrumentation turned to static. It was all we could do to limp here. I need you to fix it, and quickly." Orion gazed behind her at the majestic but visibly scorched vessel. He did not have to see the interior to guess the extent of the damage. The Radiance of Dawn was a top-of-the-line star cruiser, typically the pride of starborn traveling. For it to be in such dire shape, something catastrophic must have happened. I'll examine the drive, he offered, but I'll need access to your logs. No time, she snapped, stepping closer to him, an almost desperate note entering her tone. I'm on a critical schedule. Her voice, though commanding, was tinged with an urgency that suggested more than mechanical trouble. You will help me, she repeated, won't you? Orion studied her face. The sincerity, mixed with that flicker of anxiety, made him ignore her haughty manner. Of course, let me gather my tools. He ushered the Duchess and her servants into a side corridor, away from the main docking bay. Iona 7 was small enough that the path to his workshop was only a matter of minutes, but at every turn, the Duchess's eyes darted to the overhead lights, as though expecting them to fail at any moment. She clutched her cloak, and Orion noticed how her hands trembled. Strange, he thought, for someone of her station to display that hint of fear. Or perhaps she was merely anxious about a strict timeline, the cause of which he could only guess. Inside the workshop, the Duchess wasted no time. She motioned away her servants, giving Orion room to approach. He began hooking up a portable console to the Radiance of Dawn's databanks, scanning error messages. The logs were a tangle of contradictory readouts, power spikes, CPU overrides, and cryptic messages. This might take a moment, he said softly, half to himself. She stood behind him, exhaling in a measured way. You must hurry. We cannot be delayed. Before Orion could respond, a chime came from the Duchess's personal comm device. She glanced down, eyes narrowing. Orion saw the color drain from her face. Duchess? He asked, concern beating courtesy. She pressed a hand to her forehead. My fiancé, Lord Silas, is en route. I was hoping to avoid him, at least until I completed my, mission. Now it seems I have no choice. Orion let that sink in. Dukes, duchesses, high lords, and ladies. He understood little of the labyrinth of aristocratic alliances. Their disputes often turned messy, and, truth be told, he wanted no part of any starborn feud. But the desperation in her gaze made him put aside caution. He set the scan to run. I'll do whatever I can, Duchess. But if your fiancé is on his way, is that bad news? It is complicated, she said, looking away. A union forged to bind two fractious star systems, not a romance by choice. Let's leave it at that. Orion sensed the tension in her voice, but prying further felt unwise. Instead, he turned back to the console. The drives are severely tampered with, he murmured. These sabotage markers, they're not from normal wear. Someone intentionally compromised the systems. Her lips parted in shock. Sabotage? Who would dare? An alarm shrieked from the corridor outside. At the same instant, the Duchess staggered, dropping to one knee. Orion rushed to her side. Her face was pale, and sweat beaded her forehead. Duchess Reina, he called, kneeling next to her. Something's wrong, she managed, voice unsteady. She pressed a hand to her chest. It feels like fire. Her servants had re-entered the workshop, alarms continuing to sound. One of them, with trembling hands, retrieved a medical scanner from a side pouch. In seconds, the device blinked with an ominous red code. The servant let out a small cry. Poison, the servant whispered. A rare toxin is saturating her bloodstream. Orion's heart lurched. Poison? He had witnessed a variety of station disasters, from depressurization to chemical burns, but poison was another matter. The workshop door burst open as Dr. Lysand, Iona 7's overworked medical officer, rushed inside. She was an older woman, her once dark hair streaked with silver, but her steps were brisk. Clear the area, she barked, kneeling beside the Duchess. Orion moved back to let the doctor work. With precise efficiency, Dr. Lysand checked the Duchess's vitals, her brow furrowing in deep concern. This is advanced biomorphic poison, she said after a pause. It's attacking her cellular structure. She might have only 36 hours. A hush fell over the workshop. Duchess Reina tried to speak, but only a weak groan emerged. Her servants hovered, helpless. Orion felt his muscles tense, searching his mind for any solution. No standard antitoxin would handle an advanced biomorphic poison. They needed something specialized, possibly from deep within the Starborn archives. She must have an immediate biotransfer, Dr. Lysand declared, glancing at Orion. We need a genetically compatible donor. Or, failing that, an extremely close match to her genome. Orion rubbed his forehead. I doubt you'll find a Starborn match here, he said softly. Iona 7 has no permanent aristocracy, let alone some volunteer with Starborn heritage. There is a chance, the doctor said, that we might find partial compatibility. We should test everyone on the station. This type of poison can be slowed if there's at least a high enough correlation to the patient's gene sequence. The Duchess's eyes fluttered open, her voice barely above a whisper. Find anyone. Please. I don't have long. Orion swallowed hard. Dr. Lyson left at once, ordering the entire station to submit to a quick genetic scan. It took less than 10 minutes for the med team to gather scattered souls from corners of the station, merchants, refugees, station staff, and even a few passers-by. Most had never given a second thought to aristocratic bloodlines. Orion waited his turn for the scanner. He was a practical man, not prone to illusions of grandeur. He had always accepted a simple background. Father was a traveling mechanic, mother a resourceful station nurse. Starborn genetics were worlds away from the line of West. The scanner beeped at him, then beeped again. A hush spread through the crowd. Dr. Lyson reread the output, blinking in astonishment. There's an exceptionally close match, she said, 99.6%. Orion West is essentially compatible. A wave of shock rippled in the cramped corridor. Orion's mind reeled. Compatible? With a Starborn Duchess? The very notion bristled with impossibility. How? One of the Duchess's servants demanded. Are you certain? Dr. Lyson nodded. The readouts don't lie. West's genome is unique. He has star-coded markers previously thought exclusive to the House of Lysandris. It's enough to attempt the biotransfer. At her side, Duchess Reina coughed, struggling to speak. What does that mean? The doctor pressed a hand lightly to Reina's shoulder. It means Orion West may be the only one who can save your life. But, be warned, this treatment will create a profound bond, often permanent, between both participants. The transference merges cellular energies, forging an intimate link. The Duchess closed her eyes, probably realizing that refusing was tantamount to an early death. Orion felt a pang of trepidation. He had spent his entire life on the outskirts of influence, never associating with the galaxy's noble families. To be permanently entwined with a Duchess was a step into unknown territory, a leap that could ignite a political chain reaction. She coughed again, wincing in pain. We have no choice. Prepare it, she murmured. Then her gaze flicked to Orion. Her voice was faint but steady. If you do me the kindness. He nodded, heart hammering. I will, Duchess. If it's the only way. The next hour blurred. Dr. Lyson prepared a sealed medical bay, hooking up life support for the Duchess. The process of a biotransfer was rarely used and had not been fully researched outside Starborn medical circles. The gist was simple but dangerous. The two participants had to maintain very close physical contact to meld certain chemical signals, effectively letting Orion's body produce key antibodies and feed them into her system. In the sanitized glow of overhead lights, Orion stood at Reina's bedside. Tubes and monitors hummed, the faint scent of disinfectant mixing with his own anxiety. She looked paler than before, her regal mien replaced by vulnerability. I apologize, she said, haltingly, for dragging you into this. But if this is how I survive, I owe you a great debt. He swallowed. We'll figure out the details later, Duchess. First, let's get you stable. The procedure began with minimal contact, his bare hand pressed to hers. Almost immediately, a current of energy, faint but unmistakable, rippled through him. He saw it in her eyes, the spark of surprise. The monitors beeped, registering a shift in her vital signs. It felt like an invisible tether linking them, and Orion realized that if he tried to move more than a few meters away, the tug in his chest became uncomfortable. Fascinating, Dr. Lyson muttered, scanning the readouts. Your bodies are resonating in unison, as though forging a new blueprint. Reina's eyelashes fluttered. It tingles, she whispered. Orion tried to maintain composure, but he felt it too, waves of warmth that spiked with each shared breath. The poison in her system began to slow, though not fast enough. To purge it fully, repeated contact was required over a day or two. The doctor recommended rest in a private room with Orion by her side. Thus, The duo found themselves in a small suite near the station's medical sector, the door guarded by the Duchess's two loyal servants. Orion felt awkward. He sat in a metal chair near Reina's bed, occasionally offering water or adjusting her pillows. Every so often, the monitors beeped a warning, spiking his worry. Then, as if by an unspoken signal, he would place a hand on her wrist or her shoulder, letting that shared energy flow. "What is your story, Orion West?" she asked one late hour, voice stronger than before. The overhead lights dimmed, giving the space an otherworldly glow. He shrugged. "Raised on a fringe colony. Moved to Iona 7 to help my father repair station systems. He passed on, and I stayed, picking up mechanical roles. Nothing extraordinary. Your genome is far from ordinary," she said, a hint of humor in her tone. "Though I can't fathom why." He shifted uncomfortably. "Could be a fluke, or an unremarkable twist of fate." She offered a soft smile. "Fate often plays in deeper patterns. I sense your potential is greater than you believe." He chuckled, tension partially eased. "And what about you, Duchess? What brings a starborn aristocrat rushing alone through the Ionian frontier?" Her expression sobered. She spoke in measured words, as though each syllable cost her effort. "I was on a diplomatic errand, meeting a few officials loyal to my family, trying to circumvent a broader conflict. My fiancé, Lord Silas, represents an aligned house. Our families arranged the union to strengthen ties, but something felt off about it. I left the core worlds quietly, seeking to resolve certain matters before finalizing anything. That was when my ship's systems inexplicably failed." Orion frowned, remembering the sabotage markers he found. "So you think someone in your circle orchestrated all this? To hamper you? Or even to kill you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It seems likely. The question is who, and why." The sabotage was cunning, subtle enough to appear like a standard malfunction. Then came this poison. A coincidence? Unlikely. He let the silence hang, aware that the station's hum felt more oppressive. "Who stands to gain if you die?" She exhaled. "Lord Silas's house, perhaps. Or a rival family. Or even my own father, though I doubt that. Our aristocratic alliances are a tangle of old grudges and power plays. I can't be sure which serpent in the nest struck the blow." Orion wanted to reassure her, but found no easy words. Instead, the monitors beeped again, and he gently touched her outstretched hand, letting that bright, living warmth pass between them. The sensation was mesmerizing. In that moment, everything else receded, leaving only the electric closeness of their bond. At dawn, if one could call the station's artificial daybreak dawn, Dr. Lysand arrived with news. "We picked up an incoming vessel," she told them. "Registered to Lord Silas." Reina tensed. Orion nodded grimly. "All right, we'll let him dock, but keep security on standby." The tension thickened. Within the hour, Lord Silas's voice thundered through station comm channels. "By royal order," he proclaimed, "surrender Duchess Reina to my custody. I demand immediate access to her chambers." The message was played for Reina, who swallowed hard, her face still pale from her affliction. "We must be cautious," she told Orion. "Silas can be forceful. If he thinks I'm compromised, it may strengthen his position to claim guardianship. Or worse. Let me speak to him," Orion offered. "I'm not sure it'll help, but I'll try." Shortly thereafter, the doors to their suite hissed open. In strode Lord Silas, a tall, broad-shouldered figure in a black, gold-embroidered cloak. His features were striking but hardened by an expression of triumph and impatience. Behind him loomed three more individuals, presumably staff or guards, each with a sidearm at their waist. "I would have you alone, Duchess," Silas announced, ignoring Orion entirely. "I heard you were unwell." Reina, propped on her bed, regarded him warily. "I was poisoned, Silas. Sabotaged. And I suspect it's not a random attack." He cast a stern look in Orion's direction, as though noticing him for the first time. "Who is this?" She cleared her throat, wincing slightly at the movement. "Orion West, lead engineer of Iona 7. He saved my life. He is saving my life, rather. We're performing a biotransfer." Silas's eyes narrowed. "A biotransfer? With an outsider? You must be joking." Her features tightened. "My jokes lack the ability to cure deadly poisons," she replied evenly. "I had no choice. He is the only genetic match." Silas did not answer immediately. He looked between the two of them, taking in the closeness, the intangible presence that bound them. Orion could almost see the cogs in his mind turning. Finally, Silas sneered. Your plight must be dire indeed to stoop so low, my lady. Orion bristled at the insult, but he reined in his temper. Something about Silas's presence was dangerously volatile, as though any sign of aggression might trigger deeper conflict. A part of Orion wondered if Silas was the saboteur, but the fiancé's reaction seemed more personal anger than cunning triumph. Reina remained poised, the faint color in her cheeks betraying exhaustion. I had no time for politics, Silas. I'm fighting for my life. Fighting? Silas echoed. If you can't stand on your own 2 feet, you aren't in a position to fight. Orion took a breath. That's enough. Duchess Reina needs rest, not your condemnation. Silas glared at him. And who are you to speak to me in this manner? The man who's ensuring the Duchess has a chance to live, Orion retorted evenly. Your meddling only distracts from that. For a moment, Silas's right hand twitched near his belt, where a sidearm hung. Tension crackled. Reina, sensing the confrontation, lifted a trembling hand. Stop, both of you. She drew a breath. Silas, if you truly came to help, then help me find the culprit. If you came only to cause strife, you're not wanted. He studied her for a long beat, then gave a curt nod. Very well. Tell me who or what you suspect, and we can solve this quickly. She shared a brief glance with Orion, who quietly recapped the sabotage findings, the tampered quantum drive, and the poison discovered in her system. Silas's expression darkened. So, you suspect a conspiracy to remove you from the political board. If so, we should alert the High Council. I fear the High Council itself might be compromised, Reina murmured. Our families have many enemies, and some go so far as infiltration. Silas huffed. Preposterous. Are you suggesting the entire foundation of our society is riddled with traitors? Reina's voice hardened. I'm saying we cannot trust blindly. Before the argument could escalate, Orion's wrist communicator beeped an urgent signal. He tapped it, hearing Dr. Lyson on the other end. Engineer West, we've discovered peculiar data in the Duchess's genetic scans, ones that match your own. You should see this. Silas and Reina exchanged uneasy looks. Orion, feeling a pang of dread, tried to keep his voice steady. I'll meet you in the med lab. When he arrived, Dr. Lyson was hunched over a portable console, analyzing streams of data. I cross-referenced the Duchess's star-coded DNA with yours, she explained. And I found anomalies, evidence of tampering. The markers look artificially inserted. Precisely inserted, in fact. Orion frowned. Artificially? So, someone engineered our compatibility. That's what it suggests, she answered quietly. It's too precise to be random. Reina, pale but steady, took in the information with a mix of shock and revulsion. You mean I was a target all along, or that I was designed for this specific scenario? Or that I was, Orion said, his stomach twisting. Was I some sort of experiment? My background never hinted at anything like that. My parents were ordinary people. Perhaps they never knew, Dr. Lyson replied, sympathy edging her tone. I suspect a clandestine program orchestrated by someone with deep resources. The sabotage on your ship, the introduction of poison requiring a specific genetic match. Someone orchestrated events to force this bond. Reina pressed her hand over her eyes, momentarily overcome. But who would have such knowledge and incentive? Orion's mind spun, considering the ramifications. Someone wanted them bound in a life-and-death arrangement. Someone who might gain power from forging an unbreakable link between a starborn duchess and him. Lord Silas. Orion ventured, half expecting the doctor to dismiss the idea. She shook her head. I wouldn't jump to that conclusion yet. The sophistication here is beyond a jealous fiancé's scheme. The door hissed open, revealing Silas, his expression severe. I heard talk of tampered DNA, he said. Explain. They shared the revelations. Silas's eyes widened fractionally, but he concealed any shock with a clipped retort. A monstrous plot, if true, he said. Though I see no reason to implicate me or my house. My station is already secure. I gain nothing by forcing such a bizarre alliance. His logic, if cold, was sound. Orion exchanged a look with Reina, who seemed pained both physically and emotionally. Then who gains from it? She asked again. The High Council, or a faction within it? Silas exhaled. showing the first sign of genuine concern. Possibly. The High Council has always meddled in alliances, especially ones bridging major star systems. They might see an artificially crafted bond as a means to unify factions. Reina closed her eyes. So I'm a pawn, a puppet to be controlled. This cannot stand. And me, Orion added quietly. A tool, made to measure. This goes beyond sabotage and murder attempts. We need to uncover who pulled the strings. Silas's fists clenched. Then we must depart for the capital. It's the only place with resources to investigate such a conspiracy at the highest levels. Dr. Lysand interjected. She's still dangerously ill. Without the completed biotransfer, she could die mid-journey. Her condition stabilizes only through consistent contact with Orion. How long until the bond is fully established? Silas demanded. A day, perhaps more, Lysand answered. But time is critical. The poison won't stop evolving. It's meant to keep forcing deeper contact. If we rush, we risk complications. Silas scowled. And if we wait, the conspirators have more time to cover their tracks. We're cornered. Reina murmured from her seat. Then we must take the risk. My life might hang in the balance. But if we do nothing, the entire plot continues unchecked. Orion wanted to protest. The idea of traveling across the galaxy while tethered to someone, especially with more unknown sabotage looming, was insane. But with each slow beep of the Duchess's monitors, he realized that was their only viable path. Within hours, they prepared. The radiance of dawn was still battered, so Silas's craft, the Imperial Dart, became the means of transportation. Orion, hand rarely leaving Reina's, helped load minimal supplies. He noticed the darkness circling her eyes, a sign her condition was worsening. She occasionally leaned on him, and each time they touched, that intangible electric spark reminded him of the bond forging between them, not just biologically, but perhaps emotionally. The Imperial Dart disengaged from Iona 7 station. Orion watched through the viewport as the outpost shrank in the distance. He felt a pang of regret, leaving behind his modest life for a swirl of political chaos. But there was no turning back now. In the cabin, Silas hunched over the controls, guiding them into slipspace. Soon, the star lanes blurred to brilliant streaks, and they were en route to the capital. Reina dozed fitfully in a reclined seat, lulled by mild sedatives. Orion kept a gentle hand on her wrist, fulfilling the bizarre requirement for contact. He tried not to think about what this meant. If the bond became permanent, he would forever be linked to her, feeling echoes of her emotions, bearing part of her essence. Did she resent him for that? Did he have the strength to embrace such a link, or to break free if it became stifling? Silas's voice interrupted his thoughts. We'll arrive in 12 hours. This short slipspace jump is all we can risk, or I'd set direct coordinates. Why? Orion asked, eyeing him. Because the capital is currently under security lock from the Council. We'd be flagged the instant we tried to jump into orbit, might not even land safely. A standard approach is safer. Orion grimaced, but recognized the logic. Hours passed in tense quiet. Occasionally, Reina stirred, and Orion recited updates. She always insisted on hearing them, determined to maintain control despite her frailty. Silas, for his part, was suspiciously calm, as though he, too, realized the magnitude of the threat overshadowing them. At last, the slipspace jump ended, spitting them into normal space near the outskirts of the capital system. A sea of starships drifted in assigned lanes, each queued for planetary approach. Silas angled the Imperial Dart into a disguised route, one that avoided official customs, aiming for a private hangar affiliated with his house. They might slip in, unannounced, or so he hoped. But fate had other plans. Not halfway through final approach, a cluster of intercept craft sprang from behind the planet's third moon, converging on the Imperial Dart with practiced efficiency. Alarm klaxons blinked. Silas muttered a curse, inputting evasive maneuvers. Reina's eyes snapped open. What's happening? Silas's jaw tightened. They're scanning us. I see a registration linked to Council enforcement. They must have tracked your departure from the Ionian frontier. Reina pressed a hand to her temple, wincing at a fresh pang of pain. Orion quickly steadied her, feeling the poison's persistent push. We have to land, she said through gritted teeth. Silas tried sending standard identification codes, but the interceptors responded by powering up weapons. They must have designated us as a threat, he said grimly, weaving the craft through small pockets of debris. A voice crackled over comms, cold and authoritative. Imperial Dart, you are carrying a wanted person, Duchess Reina. Surrender immediately or face consequences. Orion's pulse hammered. Wanted by whom? He asked aloud, though the answer was likely the council or some shadowy branch of it. Reina sank back, eyes blazing with pain and anger. They're trying to brand me an outlaw to keep me from testifying about what happened, about the sabotage and the possibility of a conspiracy. They must suspect I know too much. Silas's lips curled in frustration. We can't outfight them in this craft. Options. Orion scanned the readouts. We could land on a less regulated zone, maybe in the lower city. The slums, Silas muttered. Dangerous. But so is staying up here. Reina's breath hissed, and Orion felt a pang in his chest that mirrored her agony. Down, she rasped. We'll find refuge, somehow. The Imperial Dart veered away from the main shipping lane, engines straining under Silas's forced dive. Plasma blasts streaked overhead, grazing their shields. The ship rattled from the impact. Everyone gripped their seats or consoles as the vessel plummeted into the planet's thickening atmosphere. Fire glowed at the edges of the viewport, atmosphere friction roaring like a hungry beast. They broke through cloud cover in a swirl of rain and haze, the capital's towering spires looming in the distance. At their underside, massive pipes and labyrinthine streets revealed a labyrinth of low-tier habitats. Smoke from industrial vents created swirling pockets of gloom. Orion's eyes widened, never having seen such a stark undercity. The Imperial Dart sputtered. Silas wrestled with the controls. She won't hold altitude. We have to set down, Orion said. Any open space you can find. Moments later, with a gut-churning thud, they slammed onto a broad, dilapidated landing platform. The craft skidded, sparks flying from undercarriage plating. Finally, they lurched to a stop. Sirens screeched in the background, echoing through the labyrinth of metal catwalks. Orion quickly unfastened his harness and rushed to check on Reina. The forced landing had jolted her, but she clung to consciousness. Silas cursed, scanning for pursuers on the navigation readout. They're sending ground units, he said. We have maybe 10 minutes. Despite the pain, Reina unbuckled her own harness. Then we have 10 minutes to hide. My priority is surviving long enough to expose the truth. We must locate someone we can trust, gather evidence, and present it to the right tribunal. Easier said than done, Silas retorted, but his tone held resignation. All right, let's move. They exited the craft. The undercity smelled of ozone and rust. Overhead, a lattice of walkways crisscrossed. Flickering neon signs and alien scripts cast eerie reflections on puddles. Far above, the spires of the upper city glimmered, an unreachable domain for now. Orion and Silas half-carried Reina, who tried to remain upright. Her fever soared, and Orion sensed with dread how the poison was tightening its hold. He dared not break physical contact for more than seconds. If he stepped away, a splitting ache tore at his chest, proof of the forced bond bridging them. They hurried through narrow alleys. Mechanical drones buzzed overhead, ignoring them for the moment. Distant sirens spoke of the local enforcers searching for them. Silas guided them to a battered structure that served as a subterranean marketplace, its corridors lit by flickering tubes. The place teemed with outcasts, refugees, and petty merchants hawking scraps. We can blend in here for a time, Silas said. At least until we figure out our next step. Reina's breathing was shallow. Orion felt her weight press against him, her body trembling. Dr. Lyson said the only way to truly purge the poison is repeated contact, deeper every time. He told her, feeling a flush of embarrassment at stating so personal a detail. Her eyes, fevered, flicked to his. I know, she whispered, pained but resolute. Let's find cover. At the edge of the marketplace, they rented a small walled-off storage unit from a wary attendant who seemed more interested in their credits than their identities. The space was cramped, smelling of damp metal. Orion and Silas set Reina down on a crate. She tried to straighten her regal posture, but exhaustion overcame her. Silas looked away, as though uncertain how to handle the next part. Orion removed his jacket, draping it around Reina's shoulders. We might have to, well, Intensify the transfer, he murmured. Skin-to-skin contact, at least. She swallowed, nodding. Silas cleared his throat. I'll stand guard outside, he said stiffly, striding off. In the dim light, Orion slid down next to her. She was trembling with fever, eyes unfocused. Gently, he took her hands in his, feeling the spark of energy surge once more. As Dr. Lysand explained, the more contact, the more effectively the poison was neutralized. It was no simple handshake remedy. Gently, Orion supported her, letting her lean against him. Their closeness felt both alien and oddly comforting. She closed her eyes, exhaling. I can feel your pulse, she whispered. It steadies me. It's so strange, Orion. I know this bond was engineered by some malignant plan, but I can't deny that it feels real. Like some fate entwined long before I knew you. He rested his cheek against her temple, equally unsure how to articulate the swirl of emotions. It's not the kind of introduction I expected, he said, voice low. But, for what it's worth, I'm grateful you've lived long enough to regret it. A weak chuckle escaped her lips. Grateful indeed. They shared a moment of tenuous peace, punctuated by the distant echoes of commerce and strife. Orion felt the poison's slow retreat, sensed how her body latched onto his energy. The union of their genes was no mere storybook fancy. It was a high-stakes gambit forced on them both. Yet in the hush of that moment, as they breathed in sync, something deeper flickered to life. At length, they separated. The color in her cheeks had returned, and she looked more awake. Better, she admitted. Still have a ways to go, but better. He smiled softly. We'll do as many sessions as needed. Dr. Lysand said, repeating it, until we're sure your system is clear. Let's just hope we can find a real bed next time. She gave a tiny nod, glancing around the drab storage space. Then her eyes sharpened. We still need a plan for who to trust. The council is compromised. Silas's house might be suspect. There must be some official or influential figure who stands apart from the corruption, someone who can champion our cause. Orion leaned back, recalling a name. Admiral Roan Tarth. I've heard rumors he's an independent figure on the council, not easily swayed by bribes or blackmail. Reina considered it. He has opposed certain expansionist policies. He might be an ally, or at least open-minded enough to hear us out. But getting to him will be difficult. Even if we set foot in the upper city, the enforcers are likely searching every sector. Silas chose that moment to return, stepping into the cramped area. I've made some inquiries, he said briskly, and there's a rumored safe house near the eastern quadrant, run by an old friend of my father's. We might hide there while contacting Admiral Tarth, but we need transport. Reina lifted her head. We can't remain hidden for long. The more we stall, the more time the conspirators have to tighten the net. Orion nodded. Let's move sooner rather than later. Are you strong enough, Duchess? She closed her eyes as if focusing on her internal reserves. Yes, she said at last, pushing aside exhaustion. I will stand on my own feet. Together, they exited, melding into the crowd. Silas led them along winding walkways, ducking into side alleys whenever a patrol or suspicious figure appeared. They emerged onto a rusted platform with a single battered transport skimmer that Silas evidently had bribed someone to borrow. Reina settled in the seat next to Orion. Silas took the wheel, guiding the skimmer with practiced skill. They navigated the labyrinth of undercity passages, neon lights reflecting on metal. Rain dripped from overhead pipes, creating a dissonant symphony of droplets. At length, they came to a domed structure marked only by a single glyph. Silas parked behind a cluster of stacked crates. This is the place, he said, tension in his voice. I only hope my father's friend still runs it. They knocked on an unassuming metal door. A slit opened, revealing suspicious eyes. Silas uttered a passphrase. After a moment, the door slid open, revealing a tall, cloaked figure. He ushered them inside with a silent wave. Within, the place was unexpectedly cozy. Lamps glowed warm, and the walls were lined with shelves of archaic books, star charts, and antique curios. A hush hung over the air, as though it offered sanctuary from the roiling chaos outside. The cloaked figure pulled back his hood, revealing a man perhaps in his 50s, his features stern but not unfriendly. Lord Silas, the man said with a slight bow. I am Carvel. Your father aided me once. I repay the debt. You bring strangers. Silas gestured. Duchess Reina, Soon to be. Well, that's complicated. And Orion West, an engineer. They're both in grave danger, as am I. Carvel studied Reina's drawn features, then Orion's protective stance near her. I see. Come in, quickly. You can speak freely here. They were led to a back chamber with chairs and a modest medical station. Carvel offered them refreshment. Reina settled carefully in one seat, Orion beside her. Silas remained standing, arms crossed. Carvel turned a discerning gaze on them. I caught wind of official bulletins. The Duchess is marked as a fugitive, and it's rumored she's forging an illicit union with an unknown party. Something about treason, or so the twisted story goes. Reina's cheeks flushed with anger. All because someone orchestrated sabotage on my ship and unleashed a specialized poison to drive me into a forced bond with Orion. We suspect the High Council, or part of it, is behind it, engineering us as pawns. Carvel nodded gravely. I have heard rumors of a secret eugenics project, one meant to produce genetically perfected alliances. Many in power quietly dismiss it as conspiracy talk, but I wonder if there's some truth behind it. Orion's heart thudded. So it's bigger than just the two of us. Possibly, Carvel said. But proof is everything. Without proof, the Council will spin the story to brand you as criminals. We have partial evidence from Iona 7, Orion replied, describing the sabotage logs and the DNA readouts. But it's not enough to overturn the Council's claims. Carvel studied him. What about Admiral Tarth? He might offer a route to a formal hearing, provided we can slip the net. Silas let out a long breath. That was our plan. But the moment we approach Tarth, we'll face Council security. Carvel's gaze shifted to Reina, noticing how she clutched Orion's hand for support. Time is not on your side. I can sense her illness even now. The bond must be actively maintained, correct? Reina sighed, looking to Orion. He nodded. Yes, we have to continue the process until the poison is fully neutralized, he explained. Another day or so, maybe more. Carvel pressed his lips together. Then rest here. I can arrange a discreet meeting with Tarth in 3 days. Will that suffice? Reina grimaced. 3 days, it's cutting it close. Yet they had no better option. They agreed to remain hidden in Carvel's safe house. Nights passed in a blur, each requiring Orion and Reina to deepen their bond in fleeting privacy. She grew stronger, though flushes of fever returned unexpectedly. At times, they both felt an odd sense of merged consciousness, able to pick up fleeting emotions from one another. Silas kept watch, pacing restlessly like a caged predator. Carvel gathered tidbits of intelligence from outside sources, reporting that the Council's official story labeled the Duchess an instigator of an illegal union meant to dethrone established tradition. Meanwhile, rumors soared about a hidden experiment that might link entire houses through artificially designed unions. On the second evening, while Orion and Reina shared a quiet moment, their hands entwined, she suddenly turned her gaze to him. Thank you, she whispered. Truly, you've given me more than you realize. My life is in your hands, yes, but I feel as though my heart is there too. And I know it's not entirely by choice. Yet, he squeezed her hand gently, yet it feels real nonetheless. She nodded, her eyes glistening. They said nothing more, letting the bond speak. On the third dawn, Carvel entered the chamber, an urgent expression marking his features. I have arranged a secret meeting. Admiral Tarth will come to a neutral location near the upper city. We'll need to get you there under minimal escort. Reina and Orion rose, exchanging a tense look. Silas stepped forward. I will accompany you. We can't chance the Duchess being isolated. Carvel motioned for them to follow. They emerged into the city's labyrinth once more. It was early enough that the major patrol units were changing shifts, offering a slimmer window to move undetected. They rode a discreet cargo transport, weaving past looming spires until they reached a building known for hosting private gatherings, an opulent tower overshadowed by grander structures. Inside, a wide hall with gilded columns and plush seating awaited. Admiral Tarth stood at the far end, flanked by 2 armed associates. He was a distinguished, middle-aged man with a quiet authority about him. When Reina and Orion approached, Tarth inclined his head in respect. Your Grace, Tarth said, then added, and Mr. West. I've heard you possess extraordinary circumstances. Reina, ignoring the swirling fatigue, squared her shoulders. I trust Carvel explained our predicament. The sabotage, the poison, the forced genetic bond. We suspect elements of the Council orchestrated this. Tarth listened with stoic calm, only occasionally nodding. Orion produced the data from Iona 7, logs, scans, and evidence pointing to a clandestine program. Tarth studied them with growing grimness. I have heard whispers of such a program, Project Celestial Spire, but never found evidence. Now, here it is, in your hands, literally etched into your bodies. Silas chimed in. The Council has branded us traitors. We need a public hearing, or at least a safe route to present this evidence. Will you stand for us? Tarth gave him a long, appraising look. And your role, Lord Silas? Do you truly wish to expose this, or do you only follow your fiancé's lead? Silas's jaw tightened. My house stands for honor, though it doesn't always show it. If the Council manipulates bloodlines for political gain, we must tear the scheme down. Tarth turned back to Reina and Orion. I am not without influence, but this is a dangerous road. If the conspirators control enough of the Council, they could attempt to silence me as well. You realize the scale of what you're asking. Reina's voice softened. We do. But if we don't act, everything we hold dear, our freedom to choose, the integrity of governance, dies to the puppet strings of false destiny. A flicker of admiration passed Tarth's eyes. He turned to his associates. Prepare a statement and secure a safe corridor to the Triumvirate Hall. We're going to present these findings to the High Tribunal and demand an open inquiry. One of the associates stiffened. Sir, that's a direct challenge. They may retaliate. Tarth lifted his chin. So be it. I have made my decision. Duchess, Mr. West, gather your strength. You will stand before the tribunal in 2 hours. Reina's shoulders sagged, relief mingled with dread. Orion sensed the weight on her, the poison's residue still lingering. He took her hand gently, ignoring the curious looks from Tarth's men. She mustered a faint smile at him. I never thought my day would include testifying to tear down an ancient conspiracy. Orion murmured to her, an undercurrent of dry humor in his tone. She squeezed his fingers. And I never thought I'd rely on an unknown engineer at the galaxy's edge for my survival. They retreated to an antechamber to rest until the hearing. Silas paced, tension rolling off him. Carvel kept near the door, checking external comms for any sign of infiltration. Tarth's men guarded the entrances. Meanwhile, Orion and Reina sat together, heads bowed, her cloak brushing his arm. Every so often, he'd lift a hand to her cheek, bridging that bond to keep the poison at bay. Finally, Tarth returned, gesturing for them to follow. They walked through hushed corridors leading to the Triumvirate Hall, a grand structure with towering pillars and an ornate dome. The Council rarely summoned the public here. This hearing had been arranged under Tarth's emergency authority, ensuring a modicum of fairness, at least on the surface. Inside, a tall dais loomed, where 3 robed adjudicators presided. An audience of lesser officials, scribes, and council affiliates lined the circular chamber, whispering fervently. Silas stood at one side, Carvel near the back. Tarth escorted Reina and Orion to the central floor. One robed figure cleared his throat, voice echoing in the chamber. Admiral Tarth, you request an urgent hearing regarding grave allegations, sabotage, poison, and a clandestine program that might implicate members of this council. Present your witnesses. Tarth motioned. Duchess Reina of House Lysandris, who was the direct victim of these acts, and Orion West, the man forcibly bonded to her. I ask that their testimony and data be recorded in full. The second adjudicator, a severe woman with silver hair, eyed Reina's weakened stance. Duchess, you stand accused of disloyal acts. Yet you claim your life was imperiled by a conspiracy. Speak. Reina took a shaky breath, leaning subtly on Orion's arm. She recounted her departure from the core worlds, the sabotage that caused her ship to fail, the poison discovered on Iona 7, and the forced genetic treatment. At times, her voice trembled, and Orion had to step in, clarifying how he found signs of sabotage in the radiance of Dawn's logs. They presented the medical data showing artificially engineered genetic codes that matched their DNA. As the details unfolded, the hall filled with uneasy murmurs. Some council members exchanged dark looks. The third adjudicator, a stocky man with a scar across his brow, pounded a small gavel. Order, he demanded. These are serious accusations. Who do you claim orchestrated this? Tarth answered. Evidence suggests a hidden faction within the council. Project Celestial Spire, rumored to design forced genetic alliances. The sabotage was intended to push the Duchess into that program, forging a new line bridging houses. We suspect they aim to manipulate the succession and alliances. The murmur grew louder. The first adjudicator banged the dais again, scanning the crowd. If such a faction exists, they must be identified. Do you have direct proof of council involvement? Orion stepped forward, heart pounding. We only have partial data, but the sabotage codes originated from a council signature. We also discovered infiltration in the Starborn house, likely placed by individuals with council ties. Access logs show council-level encryption. A commotion broke out near the periphery. One figure in council robes attempted to leave. Guards blocked the exit. Another council member, face flushed, stood up, pointing angrily. This is outrageous. The Duchess aims to smear the council to cover her own reckless behavior. Reina's cheeks flamed, but she lifted her chin. Reckless? You call my survival reckless? I was nearly killed by your conspirators. Orion West saved me, risking his own life in the process. A hush fell. The second adjudicator leaned forward, a flicker of sympathy crossing her face. Duchess, if what you say is true, I fear we are on the edge of an internal war. The council, compromised from within, might fracture. Silas, stepping from the sidelines, spoke. Better a fracture than a silent tyranny. We must root out the traitors who see lives as pawns. One of the robed conspirators, cornered by Tarth's men, suddenly drew a hidden weapon. Chaos erupted as plasma bolts hissed across the hall. Silas jumped in front, cloak swirling. Orion pulled Reina down, shielding her with his body. Tarth barked orders, and armed guards subdued the attacker. Shaken but determined, the adjudicators conferred. They rose, solemn expressions etched in their features. We have seen enough to warrant a deeper investigation. Duchess Reina, Orion West, you shall be placed under council protection until the matter is resolved. Silas bristled. Under protection or under arrest? The first adjudicator's voice softened slightly. Protection. You shall have lodging in a secured wing of the Capitol. We will interrogate the suspect, track leads, and reconvene with a formal tribunal in 3 days. Reina exchanged a look with Orion, relief mingled with apprehension. At least they weren't immediately branded criminals. The poison within her had receded significantly, but the bond remained. She could feel Orion's heartbeat, sense his tension, and from the way his eyes met hers, he, too, felt her gratitude and lingering uncertainty. They were escorted to a stately suite in the council complex. Guards stood by the doors, though less threatening than the enforcers who had once pursued them. Inside, lavish furnishings contrasted sharply with the stress of their predicament. Exhausted, Reina slumped onto a chaise lounge, Orion kneeling beside her. Silas hovered near the window, scanning the city's skyline. We did it for now, he said. But the conspirators won't stop. Let them come, Orion said quietly, focusing on Reina. We'll face them. Her eyes glistened, half in pain, half in determination. We will, she whispered, lifting a hand to Orion's cheek. Thank you for everything. He covered her hand with his, letting the bond surge anew. Her warmth, her steadfast spirit, and the echoes of her unwavering resolve filled him. The engineered connection had become genuine, a living tether neither had asked for, but both had accepted, perhaps even embraced. During the following 3 days, the adjudicators dug deeper. Silas provided logs from his house that, when combined with Orion's sabotage data, began revealing specific codes used by a council minister named Zaharan. Tarth uncovered old records referencing Project Celestial Spire, confirming that certain lines of aristocracy had been targeted for forced genetic bridging. A list of manipulated children, scattered across star systems, loomed as proof of the project's monstrous scope. Meanwhile, Reina's health continued to improve, though Orion's presence remained essential. They found moments of closeness in the quiet corners of the suite, forging an emotional closeness that overshadowed the orchestrated origins of their bond. Silas, while initially aloof, seemed to concede that the forced engagement between him and Reina was overshadowed by a new reality, one in which she was bound to Orion in ways neither had anticipated. At last, the day of formal tribunal dawned. The capital bustled with intense speculation. News broadcasts flickered overhead, discussing rumors of a possible council coup. Admiral Tarth escorted Reina and Orion to the Grand Forum, a far larger space than the smaller hearing hall, open to delegates from many star systems. They stepped onto a broad dais, bright lights shining upon them. The three adjudicators, joined by 6 additional members, presided from a lofty bench. One after another, witnesses testified. Carvel, presenting knowledge of the Undercity dealings. Silas, testifying about sabotage attempts. Dr. Lysand, who had arrived from Iona 7 with her medical logs. The conspirators, including Minister Zaharin, were brought forth in restraints. Before a stunned assembly, actual records from Project Celestial Spire were displayed on massive holographic screens, detailing attempts to engineer perfect cross-house gene lines. Gasps and outcries echoed throughout the forum. The final blow came when Dr. Lysand read out the specific code entries that matched the sabotage on Reina's starship to Zaharin's personal credentials. The minister shook, refusing to answer, but the evidence was undeniable. At length, the head adjudicator rose, his expression grim. "We find Zaharin and his conspirators guilty of crimes against the sovereignty of this council and the sanctity of its citizens. The sabotage and forced genetic manipulations are abominations. We hereby order the dissolution of their clandestine project, with maximum penalties for all participants." The crowd erupted in chatter. Some officials hung their heads in shame for not suspecting earlier. Others cheered for justice. Reina swayed on her feet, not from weakness but from relief. Orion slipped an arm around her waist, steadying her. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering with gratitude. The head adjudicator turned to the dais. "Duchess Reina, for your bravery in exposing this corruption, the council restores your full honor and standing. Lord Silas, your cooperation has been noted. And Mr. Orion West, though not of noble birth, you have played a vital role in preserving a life tied to this realm. The council acknowledges your heroism." A hush followed, as though everyone awaited the final statement about the bond. The second adjudicator cleared her throat. "Concerning the forced genetic connection between Duchess Reina and Orion West, the council recognizes it was formed under duress. Should you both choose to dissolve it, we can attempt a medical severance." Orion felt Reina's breath catch. He tightened his grip on her hand, suspecting what she would say. She lifted her chin, voice steady. "The bond was forced, yes, but it saved my life. It also gave me a partner I did not expect. I will not sever it unless Orion wishes to. Our connection is, in fact, precious to me, contrived as it might have been in origin. We embrace it by choice now." Her words resonated through the forum. A wave of respectful silence followed. All eyes turned to Orion, whose heart pounded at the intensity. He gazed into Reina's eyes, feeling the warmth of her acceptance, the echo of their shared experiences. He spoke quietly, but the hush made his words carry far. "Duchess Reina, I never wanted to be anyone's puppet. Yet this bond has become more than the sum of a twisted plan. If you'll have me, I'll stand by you. I choose this too." She smiled, radiant, and the assembled crowd murmured in soft approval. The head adjudicator brought down a carved staff, signifying closure. "Then it is done. May your union stand as a testament that even in the face of schemes and shadows, true resolve can find a path to the light." Tears shimmered at the corners of Reina's eyes. She turned to Orion, drawing close. He leaned in, brushing a gentle kiss against her lips, and the forum around them erupted in a spontaneous show of applause and wonder. They had not merely survived. They had toppled a dangerous conspiracy, ensuring no further unsuspecting souls would endure the same manipulations. In the days that followed, the council oversaw the dismantling of Project Celestial Spire's remnants. Reina's house, newly fortified, pledged reforms to guard against such atrocities. Silas returned to his own house, forging a more genuine alliance with Reina's family through transparent treaties, now that the forced marriage arrangement had been annulled. Orion, meanwhile, found himself adjusting to a life that was anything but the quiet station days he had known. The galaxy might still be unpredictable, but he had a place by Reina's side, recognized by the council as an honored partner. Their bond, once a fearful question, became a shared strength. Soon, the new days glimmered with hope. Duchess Reina, no longer overshadowed by poison or conspiratorial strings, spent her hours restructuring her house's ties, advocating for fair laws, and bridging divides. And there, by her side, Orion West stood, guiding mechanical marvels, ensuring starships ran smoothly, and bringing a practical perspective to the aristocratic world. One evening, after a formal dinner with other noble houses, Reina slipped away from the crowd. Orion followed her into a starlit balcony overlooking the capital. She lifted her gaze to the sky, the swirling cosmos they both had glimpsed from different vantage points. "I still can't believe how it all happened," she murmured. He stepped up behind her, letting the bond quietly pulse, a comforting reminder of their connection. "Engineered or not, it's ours now," he said softly. "And I wouldn't trade it for anything." She turned, and the hush between them carried the contentment of a well-fought victory. "We have a galaxy to reshape," she teased gently. "Are you ready for the challenges ahead?" He smiled. "I have my tools, my wits, and a bond with the most remarkable woman I've ever known. I'd say I'm more than ready." She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. The city lights below sparkled like distant constellations, a reflection of the infinite possibilities that now stretched before them. Their story had begun in sabotage and poison, but it ended in hope and partnership, a testament that even in the darkest conspiracies, the human and starborn spirit could triumph, forging genuine love from the strangest of circumstances. And so they stood beneath the boundless firmament, content in a moment that promised a bright future, hand in hand, knowing that, through resilience and choice, they had not only undone a monstrous scheme, but also discovered their place among the stars, together.